will recover all. Let's pray. Father, I sure do need You this morning. I thank You for the truth of Your Word and how the truth of Your Word strengthens and encourages and comforts. And so, Lord, I ask You this morning to please give each of us from Your Word what we need that we might serve You more. In Jesus' name, amen. Here we have David. He's been on the run from Saul. Saul has been on the move to kill David. David's had to go from cave to cave, hiding in the wilderness, out in the forest, in trenches. David's been on the move, and he's gathered an assortment of other men who are also on the run, and they've come to David, and they've yielded their allegiance to him, and now they're fighting with him against the enemies of Israel. From time to time, they go into the various surrounding enemy nations, and they spoil those other villages. In the chapter before what we read, he goes with the Philistines. The Philistines have now set themselves in array against the children of Israel, and children of Israel have brought their armies, and we're going to fight with the Philistines. And David, I'm not really sure what his intentions were here, but he took his followers and went to the Philistines, who he had now made friends with. Now the Philistines were the enemy. He gets there, and the Philistine generals are marching before their king and presenting themselves and their armies, and David also comes before them. And those Philistine generals go to their king, and they said, "Hey, what in the world is this Hebrew? What is this guy David doing here to fight with us against the Hebrews?" Said, "King, don't you remember this is the one they sang songs about, that Saul had killed his thousands and David his tens of thousands? Don't you remember, Saul, that those tens of thousands were our people? Don't you know how he killed the giant Goliath? Surely in the heat of this battle, he will turn on us, and his men will turn on us and try to gain favor with Saul and the armies that have run him out." The king gives way to those generals, and he says to David, "Listen, David, since you've left Israel, you've been faithful to me. I have no reason to doubt you. I trust you, David, but for the sake of the other generals, you're going to have to lay out on this one." David and his men go back to their city that they're living in, a city called Ziklag. When they are yet afar off from Ziklag, they look in the distance and they see the smoke rising from the city. While they were gone, the Amalekites had attacked. While their guard was down, while they were doing what they thought they were supposed to be doing, the enemy snuck in and sucker punched them. And they approach the city, and they see their houses and their buildings burnt with fire. They begin to go to their homes and look for their wives and their children, but they're nowhere to be found. No dead bodies, just all missing. David and his men began to, the Bible says, lift up their voices, and they wept until they had no more power to weep. They were grieved. The thing that was most precious to them was gone. The enemy had snuck in and stolen them away while they were out doing what they thought they were supposed to be doing. The dearest thing had been taken. Their wives were gone. Their sons and their daughters had been taken away. Their homes had been destroyed. All that they had worked for, all that they had fought for, all that they had sacrificed for, all those things in which they had wrapped their very life up in were now gone. Wind had been knocked out of them. They began to weep. Can you imagine? Can you imagine how the parents up in Connecticut must feel right now? Who get up a normal morning and send their children off to school. And they either get a phone call or see it on the news or hear on the radio there's been a shooting at the school in which their children attend. They get in their cars and they get there as fast as they can. I mean, these are their babies. They had sacrificed everything for these babies. You parents know what I'm talking about. Your life is wrapped up in them. Can you imagine the angst as they're going there wondering, is my child okay? Can you imagine the jubilation as they see their child alive and okay? But can you imagine the heartache and the anguish of those parents who are waiting for word, waiting for some news? Is my child, what class was it? Maybe the first thing leaks out is the grade level. Well, that's the grade my child was in. It's the grade, that's the hallway that my child was on. Maybe they begin to ask the authorities, what room was it? What class was it? Who was hurt? And maybe they began to bring the bodies out. Can you imagine seeing your little precious one lifeless on a stretcher? Can't imagine that. Can't imagine it. Can you imagine even seeing your child wounded? I mean, there'd be a little relief, but still the pain of knowing what somebody had done. Here, David and his men, they come back to Ziklag. Everything precious to them is gone. That'd be like the end of the world, wouldn't it? I mean, you'd almost feel like, I don't even want to live anymore. You would almost say to yourself, well, why couldn't I have been here? I would have gladly have taken the bullet for my child. And all these things begin to go through your mind. If I would have done this, and if I could have done this, and I wanted to protect my baby. And David and his men, they're in that type of heartache right now. Their wives and their children and their homes, everything, it's gone. Then to add to David's grief, he was at a distress because those men that he led, those brothers in arms, they had fought side by side. They had sacrificed, put their life on the line for David, and David had put his life on the line for them. And now they're in such agony, they're in such grief that they began to say, it's David's fault. It's David's fault. Being a leader can be a very lonely spot. I'm not just talking about leader of an army or a kingdom, even in that home. Sometimes mom and dad doing your best to raise your young'uns, it can sometimes be a very lonely spot, can it? They begin to say it's David's fault. These were his friends. And now he hears them murmuring, let's kill him. It's his fault. We left everything to follow David. Now we've lost our wives, we've lost our children. They had hid with him in the caves. They had hid with him in the wilderness. Fought side by side. Now they're speaking of stoning him. Can you even begin to imagine what David's heartaches were at that point? He's lost his wives. He's lost his children. His friends are turning on him. No doubt he questioned within himself, what have I done? What could I have done differently? I didn't know the enemy was coming. Thought we were out to meet the enemy. I didn't know they were going to sneak attack us. Can you imagine? He probably asked himself, where did I go wrong? He probably said, Lord, don't you remember I fought for you? Remember Goliath? I was just a young man. I put my neck on the line for your glory. How could this happen? How could this happen to my family? How could you let this happen, God? No doubt he thought about, as he was in the cave and hiding, and Saul would come out to kill him. Twice he refused to lay his hand on God's anointed. He said, God, don't you remember? I've been faithful to you. What have I done? Why would you let this happen? I like verse number 7. Number 6. Said David was greatly distressed. For the people spake of stoning him, because the soul of all the people was grieved, every man for his sons and his daughters. So what did he do? Preacher, what do you do when you're in that situation? What do you do when your heart's breaking in two? What do you do when you don't know what to do? You ever been there? If you haven't, it'll happen one day. You don't know what the right thing to do is sometimes. But David encouraged himself in the Lord his God. He encouraged himself in the Lord his God. I believe that even in the midst of his grieving and in the midst of his distress, he reminded himself of how good God had been to him. We see this process in David. If you read the book of Psalms, you see it over and over again. I've been teaching about the potter and the clay on Wednesday nights, and how the potter, to prepare that clay, he has to dig it up, and then he sets it out to be weathered, and it becomes dry, and then after it dries, he takes something and he pounds it into dust. Then he runs it through a sieve, and he pulls the rocks, the imperfections out. Then he soaks it in water, and then he pulls it out, and he begins to knead it and to mash it and to tread on it. And then he begins to pound it. Then he begins to cut it and pound it some more. Then he puts it on that wheel. He begins to mold it, and if it's marred, he smashes it down, and he starts back over again. And boy, that's a painful thing, isn't it? You read the book of Psalms, and you see often David, he gets to that point in his life, and he says, God, again? Again? You're having to mash me down again? You're putting me through the fire again? He was on the flee from Saul at one point. And there was a man named Doeg. He was an Edomite, one of Saul's men. He was in a temple and saw David. As David's on the run, David gets Goliath's sword from the priest. Old Doeg runs and tells Saul, hey, I saw David. He's down at the temple, and the priest was helping him. Saul sends some men down there, kill all the priests at the temple. One escapes. But listen to what he said. As David's speaking of that treachery, that betrayal, he said, but I am like a green olive tree in the house of God. I trust in the mercy of God forever and ever. I will praise thee forever because thou hast done it. I will wait on thy name, for it is good before thy saints. And in the verses prior to that, he's singing the blues, so to speak. God, you see what I'm going through? Do you see my heartache? I've been faithful. That man that's trying to kill me, I loved him. I was his servant. I fought for him. And then he gets to this part and he says, but I tell you what I'm going to do, God. Yeah, I can't see the light at the end of the tunnel, but I'm going to keep trusting in you. Because you've been good to me this far. And you've led me this far. God, I ought to be a dead man. I ought not have the blessings that you've given to me. And so, listen, God, even though it's dark right now, even though I don't understand right now, God, here's what I'm going to do. I'm just going to keep trusting in you. Do you realize that He is the only constant that we really have? There's no other constant. Well, our families are, well, I love family. Family's not constant. They're human. I love having friends. But my friends are not a constant in my life because they're human. They're fallible. They make mistakes. They'll let you down sometimes. Doesn't mean they're not your friends. It means they're human. Well, I love this church, Unity Baptist Church. I love my church family. But my church family is not my constant. And by the way, your pastor is not your constant. I'm just a man. But God, even when things are going bad, we can encourage ourselves, not in ourselves, but in the Lord. And by the way, that's why it is so important that you, as an individual on your own, get to know Him. Because there's going to come a time in your life where nothing else can encourage you, and you're going to have to lean on God. Psalm 103. Well, David had it tough. Had a tough life. The man that he's idolized, it was his hero, and he served out to kill him. His sons, one of his sons raped a daughter, and then another son killed that son, and then that son that killed that son later on rebelled against him and ran him off the throne. His general Joab, who had been so faithful, sided with his son and rebelled against him. He had been run off the throne and run out of the city. Yet he writes in Psalm 103, bless the Lord, O my soul. And all that is within me, bless His holy name. Bless the Lord, O my soul, and forget not all His benefits. Forget, hey, David, things are looking pretty bad to you. I know, just hold on, I'm thinking. Oh, you're thinking of how to get out of this? You're thinking of a plan? No. I'm just remembering how far God's brought me. I'm just taking some time to remember how faithful He's been to me, even though I was unfaithful to Him. I'm pausing to remember the Lord's favor on me and the Lord's blessings on me. When David was hiding in a cave, he said this, I looked on my right hand and beheld, but there was no man that would know me. Refuge failed me. Listen to this sad phrase. No man cared for my soul. Nobody cared. They didn't care where I was at. They didn't care what I was going through. Nobody cared. Maybe they wanted to, but they couldn't understand because they've not been where I've been. You ever felt that way? What did David do at that point? He said, I cried unto Thee, O Lord. I said, Thou art my refuge and my portion in the land of the living. In the midst of that, in that cave, there's nobody that cared about me. Oh, Lord, but You're my portion. You know what that means? Lord, You're all I need. You're all I need. Asaph, who was also a writer of many psalms, evidently he learned that technique from the great psalmist, that technique of saying how bad things were and then saying, oh, but in spite of it all, God is still faithful. and God is still true, and God is still my God. So we see that pattern in Asaph in Psalm 77, verses 10 through 12, as he's speaking of all that's going wrong with him. Listen to what he says in Psalm 77:12. And I said, this is my infirmity. He said, these are my troubles right here. Today we would say, it is what it is. Can't be changed. It just is what it is. This is my infirmity. But I will remember the years of the right hand of the Most High. That right hand, that's the hand of blessing. I will remember the works of the Lord. Surely I will remember thy wonders of old. I will meditate also of all thy work and talk of thy doings. Hear what he's saying? He started out saying all that was bad. You read that Psalm 77. My son showed me that chapter last night. I read it. What a blessing that chapter is. And then he gets to that point and he said, but hey, you know what? It is what it is. I don't like it, but that's just how it is. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm just going to take some time to remember how good God is. In Psalm 73:26, he said this, my flesh and my heart faileth, but God is the strength of my heart and my portion forever. What did David do when he didn't know what to do? He encouraged himself in the Lord, but that's not all he did. Number 2, we look at verses 7 and 8. It says, and David said to Abiathar the priest, Ahimelech's son, I pray thee, bring me hither the ephod. And Abiathar brought thither the ephod to David, and David inquired at the Lord. He didn't just encourage himself in the Lord, he sought the Lord. He ran to him. Oh, the men are about to stone him. He's grieving, he's in distress. And he takes some time. He said, boy, wait a minute. God, I've been in some tight fixes before, and you've always been there with me. You've taken care of it. God, you did it. Hey, bring me that ephod. I'm going to take some time to seek God in this. One of the worst things we can do when things get bad is take things in our own hand and try to do it our own way without first going to God. Hey, if Joshua, after they defeated Jericho, if he would have taken some time to go to God first, God would have told him that Achan maybe had sinned, and they wouldn't have lost those men they lost in the battle. But see, he planned that first battle on his own. He'd have just gone to God first. He cried out to God. We hear the children of Israel, many times you read where it doesn't just say they prayed, but it says they cried out to God. One time in the Bible we see Hannah, she's praying quietly, her lips are moving, nothing coming out, and the priest looked at it and thought that was odd. Because those Old Testament saints, they didn't just, oh God, I sure need you. They cried out to him. Psalm 34:4, I sought the Lord, David said. I sought him, and he heard me and delivered me from all my fears. Psalm 77:1-3, I cried unto God with my voice, even unto God with my voice, and he gave ear unto me. He pursued God. He encouraged himself in the Lord. And here's the last thing. Verses 8 and 9. And David inquired at the Lord, saying, shall I pursue after this troop? Shall I overtake them? And he answered him, pursue, for thou shalt surely overtake them, without fail recover all. So David went. What else he did? He encouraged himself in the Lord. He sought the Lord. And he kept on fighting. He didn't give up. He didn't stop. He sought God and found out what was right, and as painful as it was, and as burdened as his heart was, and as grieved as he was, and as distressed as he was, and as fearful as he was, he said, okay, God, this is what you want me to do. Then God, with all that is within me, I'll do it for you. Because he followed the Lord, by the way, and fought on, he regained he was able to reclaim all of his family. All of his family. Let me pause here for just a moment. I know some of you have some real heartaches because of family members that have gone astray. But don't you stop fighting for the Lord. Worst thing you can do. Just do right. Just keep doing right. David had fought Goliath. He had hid from Saul. He kept fighting the enemies of his people. He kept fighting the enemies of God. He kept pursuing God. And even when he was in grief, over and over in the book of Psalms, you see it. Oh, God, all this is happening to me. Oh, God, but I'm going to keep trusting in you. And he kept on fighting for the Lord. Went over to the Thurston's house when Miss Rose passed away Friday. What a godly couple, the Thurstons. They're the real deal. It's not just show. It's not just a put-on Christianity. It's the real deal. Boy, the grace of God was on him. He was doing well, but he said, Pastor, she helped me to serve the Lord. She helped me continue to serve the Lord. And he said this, I know my past preacher, and I'm scared. I'm scared now. Scared of how I'll do. I don't want to let the Lord down. I said, Brother Thurston, here's all I know to tell you. God's allowed you to go through some heartache. It's for a reason. God left you here. He has a purpose for you, Mr. Thurston. And so as soon as all this is calmed down and the family's gone home, you're going to have to busy yourself serving God. Keep on fighting. You have a heartache? I do. You have a heartache? You ever feel like just giving up, throwing in the towel? You ever feel like it doesn't matter what you do? I ain't going to work anyway. You ever feel that way? What do we do, preacher? You keep your eyes on Christ. He's constant. Those old mariners, now I'm not a mariner. I've not been on ships much, but I know this. If they lose all other their equipment, they can still guide themselves. At night, there's that star up there in the north. It's constant. It's always there. It doesn't move. They'll keep their eye on that. They'll know where they're going. Keep your eyes on Christ. Encourage yourself in Him. Seek the Lord. Walk with Him. Personally, you don't rely on me, or if you're visiting, don't rely on your pastor solely. Walk with God for yourself. You seek Him for yourself. He is a personal God, far more so than a corporate God. He's a personal God. You seek Him. And then just determine, come hell or high water, God, I'm not giving up. God, I'm not quitting. I'll keep on fighting the battles for you. I'll lose everything I have. I'll lose everything dear to me. I will not give up on you because you've never given up on me. Let's bow our head and close our eyes, please.